Beneath layers of earth that have not seen the light for millennia, the ground sometimes yields objects that do not belong. Pieces of metal that have not rusted, gears cut with a precision only modern machinery should achieve, fragments of alloys that were thought impossible for ancient smelters to create. They emerge from the soil like whispers from a forgotten age, hinting at a story history never intended to tell. The first discoveries were easy to dismiss. A gear here, a strange shard there, each one explained away as contamination from a later period or a modern object misplaced in the dig. But over time, the anomalies multiplied. Archaeological reports began documenting items buried in geological layers, dated thousands of years before recorded civilization. Artifacts whose craftsmanship rivaled anything produced in the Renaissance. Yet they were found among the bones of prehistoric animals and crude stone tools. In the dry deserts of Iraq, a simple clay jar was unearthed, its interior lined with a thin cylinder of copper and capped with a plug of asphalt. For decades, it sat unnoticed in a museum until a curious engineer reconstructed it, only to find it could generate electricity. Known now as the Baghdad Battery, it was dated to 2,000 years ago, at a time when history tells us no one knew how to produce an electric current. Similar objects have been found scattered across Mesopotamia, each slightly different in design, as if part of an evolving technology. In the mountains of Romania, miners uncovered a hoard of artifacts while excavating for gold. Among them were wedge-shaped metal tools composed of an aluminum alloy. Science places the development of smelted aluminum in the late 19th century. Yet these tools were buried alongside mastodon bones, extinct for over 10,000 years. Metallurgical testing confirmed the alloy's purity was near impossible without modern electrolytic refining. On a windswept island in the Aegean Sea, divers searching a shipwreck stumbled across corroded bronze plates encrusted with marine growth. When cleaned, the fragments revealed a complex network of interlocking gears, dials, and inscriptions. The Antikythera mechanism, as it became known, was a fully functional analog computer, capable of predicting astronomical positions decades in advance. It dated to at least 100 BCE, but its internal precision rivaled that of clockwork emerging in Europe 14 centuries later. These were not isolated incidents. Across the globe, from the depths of South American mines to the frozen tundra of Siberia, discoveries continued to surface. Small in number, but impossible to reconcile with the established timeline. Each find seemed to hint at civilizations, not just capable of crafting fine tools and jewelry, but of harnessing scientific principles far ahead of their supposed time. Yet for every artifact that reached public awareness, many more remained in storage, locked away in museum basements, or dismissed as curiosities. The official narrative remained unchanged, insisting that progress was linear, from stone tools to bronze, from bronze to iron, from handcraft to machines. But the ruins whispered otherwise. Those whispers grew louder in sites like Pumapunku in Bolivia, where massive stone blocks, some weighing over 100 tons, were carved with interlocking grooves and perfectly straight channels. The precision of these cuts, achieved on one of the hardest stones in the world, baffled modern engineers. Without diamond tools or advanced saws, replicating such work today is nearly impossible. And yet, the stones have weathered under the high-altitude sun for centuries, perhaps millennia. In India's ancient temples, intricate stone reliefs depict objects and forms that bear uncanny resemblance to gears, syringes, and even devices that appear to be lenses. Whether symbolic or literal, they suggest a cultural memory of technologies not expected to exist in their era. Some of these depictions are accompanied by Sanskrit verses describing mechanisms and processes in detail, though cloaked in metaphor, leaving modern researchers to wonder if they are poetic exaggerations or encrypted technical manuals. The deeper one digs into these anomalies, the clearer a pattern emerges. These are not the scattered inventions of lone geniuses, nor the result of random chance. They seem instead to be remnants of coherent technological systems. Systems advanced enough to be dangerous in the wrong hands, and advanced enough to be valuable to those in power. Systems that, at some point in history, vanished almost completely, leaving only a handful of survivors buried beneath the dust of time. It is tempting to imagine these artifacts as relics from an age of wonders, a lost chapter in human history when innovation flourished only to be snuffed out. But in reality, their existence raises more troubling possibilities. If such knowledge once existed, then it was deliberately erased, not forgotten by the slow erosion of memory, but actively removed from the record. The question is not merely how these objects were made, but why they were buried, why their creators left no clear trace, and who benefited from their disappearance. The ruins do not answer. They only whisper. And for those who listen closely, the next clue lies not in the artifacts themselves, but in the machines and devices they resemble. Machines we thought we invented in the modern age, yet whose shadows seem to reach back thousands of years. From here, the trail moves from scattered relics to a device so complex, so far beyond what history says should have been possible, that even today it challenges our understanding of ancient science. Its gears have not turned for over 2,000 years, but the secrets they hold may yet shift how we see the origins of technology. From the scattered anomalies in ancient ruins, one artifact stands apart, not merely for its mystery, but for the undeniable skill it demands from whoever built it. Recovered in 1901 from the seabed off the Greek island of Antikythera, it was a lump of corroded bronze encased in stone-like incrustations. At first, it seemed no different from the other cargo recovered from the ancient shipwreck: amphorae, statues, and coins. But when the crust was carefully removed, something extraordinary emerged. A labyrinth of interlocking gears, precisely cut teeth, and engraved dials that should not, by any known history, have existed in the ancient world. It came to be known simply as the Antikythera mechanism. Dating placed it at over 2,000 years old, centuries before the birth of modern clockmaking. Yet, when scientists reconstructed it, the device proved capable of modeling the movements of the sun, moon, and even predicting eclipses with remarkable accuracy. Some researchers now believe it could track the cycles of planets and align them with the dates of ancient athletic games, such as the Olympics. What is most striking about the mechanism is not only its complexity, but the knowledge it implies. To design it, one would need a deep understanding of astronomy, mathematics, and gear ratios, disciplines that, according to traditional history, were still in their infancy in 100 BCE. And this was no prototype cobbled together in secrecy. Its construction suggests the hand of a master craftsman working within an established tradition, where such precision engineering was understood and practiced. If a device of this sophistication could be produced in the ancient Mediterranean, what else might have been possible? That question grows heavier when we look at other relics, some far less famous, that seem to echo the Antikythera's genius. In the ruins of the ancient Greek city of Syracuse, writings attributed to Archimedes describe devices eerily similar in principle to mechanical calculators. These accounts speak of geared models representing the heavens, capable of simulating celestial motion, a concept uncannily close to what the Antikythera achieved. Though none of Archimedes' machines survive, his recorded inventions, from war engines to complex pulleys, suggest he could have been part of the same lineage of engineering knowledge that birthed the Antikythera mechanism. Further east, in the Han Dynasty of China, the court astronomer Zhang Heng constructed an elaborate bronze sphere around 132 CE. This instrument could model the sky and track the positions of the stars and planets. Other Chinese engineers of the period are said to have created mechanical devices driven by water clocks, some capable of automating movements to mimic celestial patterns. These, too, required a mastery of gears, axles, and precision tolerances that should not have existed without centuries of accumulated technical skill. Even in the Islamic Golden Age, Hundreds of years later, master artisans built astronomical clocks and geared astrolabes of staggering accuracy. Many of these devices share design principles that could trace their origins back to much earlier prototypes. It is as though the knowledge traveled invisibly through time, resurfacing in different cultures, adapted to their own purposes, but always carrying echoes of something older, perhaps much older. The Antikythera mechanism itself hints at this lineage. Modern studies using advanced imaging have revealed inscriptions on its inner surfaces, instructions for use, and explanations of its functions. The lettering is meticulous, suggesting it was a finished consumer device, not a one-off experiment. This raises a difficult truth. If it was mass-produced, even in small numbers, there should have been others. Yet we have only this single broken example. The rest, if they existed, have either been destroyed by time or remain hidden from view. Some historians argue that the Antikythera was an isolated marvel, the work of a single genius whose methods died with him. But the parallels in different corners of the ancient world suggest otherwise. Consider the geared devices found in the Roman city of Herculaneum, preserved under volcanic ash. Though cruder and less complex than the Antikythera, they reveal the same mechanical logic, a design tradition not bound to a single inventor. There is also the curious case of the Nebra sky disk from Central Europe. Dated to around 1600 BCE, it is not mechanical but serves as an astronomical instrument, mapping the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. Its precision suggests that the tracking of celestial cycles was already an established practice over 1,000 years before the Antikythera. The leap from static tools like the sky disk to complex gear-driven computers is vast, but perhaps not as impossible as it seems when knowledge is preserved and refined over generations. All of these clues point to a troubling possibility that what we call invention may often be reinvention, the rediscovery of principles that humanity once knew but allowed to slip through its fingers. If that is the case, then the Antikythera mechanism might not be the dawn of complex machinery, but its twilight, the final echo of an older, more widespread technological culture that vanished before our written histories began. It is here that the story grows darker. The shipwreck where the Antikythera was found lay on a known trade route between the Greek mainland and Asia Minor. If such mechanisms were transported and traded, their reach could have been vast. But in the centuries following its creation, political upheaval, war, and the slow decay of centralized knowledge erased much of the ancient world's scientific foundation. Great libraries burned, scholars were scattered, and specialized workshops vanished. The delicate gears of such machines, useless without understanding, would have been melted down for their bronze, leaving almost no trace. The mechanism's survival is therefore almost miraculous. It endured not because it was cherished, but because it was lost to the sea before it could be dismantled or destroyed. This accident of history has allowed us a single, fragile glimpse into an entire chapter of human ingenuity, one that we are only now beginning to piece together. But to truly understand the Antikythera, we must look beyond Greece, beyond even the Mediterranean, to other ancient devices that share its logic. For scattered in ruins and buried in forgotten cities are machines that seem to belong to the same hidden network, devices built not for war or survival, but for precision, calculation, and control of forces far greater than their makers' lifetimes. And in following that trail, we begin to approach something stranger still, the possibility that these ancient mechanisms were not isolated curiosities, but the visible tips of a technological iceberg whose true depth remains hidden beneath thousands of years of lost history. If the Antikythera mechanism hinted at a mastery of gears and astronomy, other ancient relics whisper of something even more unsettling, a command over energy itself. Scattered in museums and storerooms, often mislabeled or dismissed as curiosities, are objects whose designs make little sense in the context of their time. Yet when modern scientists have taken the time to reconstruct them, These artifacts have revealed startling possibilities. Among the most famous of these enigmas is the so-called Baghdad Battery. Unearthed in the 1930s from a Parthian-era site near modern-day Baghdad, it appears at first glance to be a simple clay jar. But its interior tells a different story. A rolled copper cylinder sealed with asphalt, housing an iron rod at its core. The arrangement mirrors the structure of a galvanic cell, the same principle used in modern batteries. Experiments with replicas have shown that, when filled with an acidic solution like vinegar or grape juice, the jar can generate a modest but measurable electric current. The discovery sparked decades of speculation. What use could such a device have served in 200 BCE? One possibility is electroplating, the process of depositing a thin layer of metal onto a surface. Ancient artifacts with delicate gold finishes could, in theory, have been treated using such a method. Others suggest medicinal or ritualistic uses, where a mild electric shock might have been applied to the skin as part of a healing practice or a symbolic display of divine power. Whatever its function, the Baghdad Battery challenges the assumption that ancient societies were ignorant of electrochemical principles. The battery is not alone. In the ruins of Mesopotamia, archaeologists have found ceramic vessels lined with residues of substances that, when analyzed, reveal traces of conductive metals. These jars, older than the Parthian examples, lack the clear metal components of the Baghdad find, but their chemical signatures hint at similar applications. It is as if the concept of harnessing a chemical reaction for practical effect was known, perhaps imperfectly, long before recorded history credits it. Beyond Mesopotamia, other artifacts bear the fingerprints of energy manipulation. In ancient Egypt, certain relief carvings depict what appear to be large bulbs connected to cables and mounted on stands. Though mainstream scholars interpret these as symbolic or ceremonial, engineers have noted the uncanny resemblance to vacuum tubes or arc lamps. Some have even constructed working models, inspired by the carvings, using known ancient materials to produce dim light without flame. Whether these experiments reflect actual ancient practice or coincidence is hotly debated, but the possibility fuels a persistent question. Were ancient builders experimenting with light, electricity, and stored energy in ways that later civilizations forgot? What strengthens this line of inquiry are the materials themselves. In several ancient sites, including parts of the Indus Valley, excavations have revealed ceramics and stones embedded with metallic inclusions that could serve as conductors. Some of these were arranged in patterns that seemed deliberate, as if intended to guide or channel something, perhaps water, perhaps current. Tests on certain samples have shown they can function as crude capacitors, storing and releasing small amounts of electrical charge. Such finds could be dismissed as coincidence if they were isolated. But taken together, the batteries of Mesopotamia, the conductive ceramics, the suggestive carvings, they form a mosaic of evidence pointing toward a forgotten knowledge of energy generation and control. Not on the scale of modern industry, but enough to suggest deliberate experimentation, application, and refinement. To create such devices, ancient craftspeople would need more than trial and error. They would require consistent materials, knowledge of chemical reactions, and precise construction methods, all of which point to organized workshops and a tradition of technical expertise. Just as the Antikythera mechanism implied a lineage of mechanical engineering, these energy-related artifacts suggest an unbroken thread of electrochemical understanding, at least within certain circles. Yet, unlike monumental architecture or grand inscriptions, these technologies leave few dramatic ruins. Bronze gears corrode, clay jars crumble, organic components rot away. What remains is fragmentary, easily overlooked, and often relegated to the background of archaeological discovery. It is perhaps for this reason that they have escaped the public imagination, overshadowed by temples and statues. Still, when modern researchers reconstruct these devices and see them function, When a clay jar from the ancient Near East lights a bulb, or a stone vessel from a forgotten workshop holds a measurable charge, the implications are difficult to ignore. These are not the toys of artisans. They are the practical tools of minds, willing to experiment with forces invisible to the eye, to capture and tame them, however modestly, for a purpose we can only guess at. The tragedy, as with so many ancient inventions, is that whatever body of knowledge supported these creations seems to have dissolved. Wars, invasions, and the slow erasure of cultural memory swept away the workshops, the masters, and the apprentices who might have carried the craft forward. All that remains are scattered examples, survivors by chance, preserved by the peculiarities of burial, neglect, or disaster. And yet, these relics form a bridge in our investigation. If ancient engineers could master the principles of chemical electricity, if they could shape materials to store and release energy, then the leap to more complex applications, powering devices, assisting construction, or illuminating darkness, becomes far smaller. The question is not whether such a leap was possible, but whether it was ever made, and if so, why it was lost. From the gears of the Antikythera to the humble clay jar that might have been a battery, the picture grows clearer. Across continents and centuries, there are signs of a shared ambition to understand, capture, and manipulate the forces of nature. Whether mechanical or electrical, these technologies speak to a human drive that transcends eras, a drive that does not wait for the right century to arrive, but appears wherever minds and means converge. As we follow this trail further, we will encounter even stranger possibilities, relics that hint not only at the generation of power, but at the deliberate transmission of it, across distances, through materials, and perhaps even through the air itself. From the quiet hum of ancient electrochemistry, our trail now leads into the blazing heart of ancient furnaces. Or, more accurately, to metals that suggest furnaces far beyond the capabilities history allows. If the Baghdad battery and its kin hint at an unexpected mastery of energy, then these metallurgical finds are proof that somewhere in humanity's forgotten past, there were those who could bend the very bones of the earth into forms that should not have been possible. One of the most confounding examples comes from the sealed tomb of a Chinese general who died over 1,500 years ago. When archaeologists pried open the burial chamber, they found ornaments and belt buckles with a silvery sheen that resisted tarnish. Metallurgical analysis revealed the material to be aluminum, a metal that, in our modern understanding, cannot be produced without complex electrolysis, a process developed only in the late 19th century. In nature, aluminum is bound tightly in ores like bauxite, and freeing it requires temperatures and techniques far beyond what conventional history grants to the ancient world. This was not an isolated trinket either. The craftsmanship was deliberate, the shaping precise, the alloying exact. Whoever fashioned these objects did not stumble into aluminum by accident. They understood its properties, valued its resistance to corrosion, and worked it with confidence. The question is not only how they made it, but why such a knowledge disappeared so completely that humanity would not rediscover it for more than a millennium. Half a world away, in the highlands of South America, another anomaly has emerged. Among the ruins of pre-Columbian cultures, archaeologists have found bronze artifacts with properties that defy expectations. These bronzes, instead of the usual copper and tin mixture, contain precise proportions of arsenic, nickel, and even small traces of other rare elements, a combination that produces extraordinary hardness and resistance to wear. Modern metallurgists who have studied these samples note that the level of control required to achieve such alloys suggests not only advanced smelting techniques, but an empirical knowledge of metal behavior under varying temperatures. In certain cases, the ores from which these metals were drawn came from deposits hundreds of kilometers apart, implying a network of trade, resource management, and purposeful selection. This is metallurgy as an art and a science, undertaken not by chance, but by design. Even more striking is the fact that some of these alloys resist corrosion in ways comparable to stainless steel, a material supposedly born only in the industrial age. There are other, subtler clues scattered in the archaeological record. In parts of ancient Egypt, samples of iron tools have been found with a purity and carbon distribution that modern metallurgists would recognize as nearly on par with industrial steel. Yet the official timeline insists that Egypt did not enter its Iron Age until centuries later, and that even then, the processes were rudimentary. The implication is that isolated workshops, perhaps tied to priestly or royal knowledge, possessed capabilities that the rest of society did not. We tend to imagine metallurgy in the ancient world as smoky hearths and crude molds, but what these discoveries hint at is an entirely different scale of operation, one that may have involved sealed furnaces, controlled atmospheres, and temperatures capable of separating elements that naturally resist isolation. In the case of ancient aluminum, this would mean not just fire, but the manipulation of chemical reactions at a level that presupposes an understanding of electrolysis or an equivalent process. How such knowledge could emerge, flourish briefly, and vanish is a question that shadows all these discoveries. War, environmental collapse, or the death of a ruling elite could easily erase a tradition of high metallurgy, especially if it was confined to a small circle of specialists. The decay of physical evidence over centuries further obscures the trail, leaving us only with the most durable, the finished products themselves, to testify to what once was. There is also the recurring suggestion that some of these metals were not merely decorative or functional, but part of a greater technological framework. High-purity aluminum, for example, is lightweight and highly conductive, qualities that make it ideal for electrical applications. Corrosion-resistant bronzes and steels could serve in machinery or tools meant to endure for generations. This invites a tantalizing thought. Were these artifacts fragments of larger systems, machines, structures, or devices now lost to time that depended on such materials to function? In examining the chemical fingerprints of these alloys, modern scientists often find that the elements were combined in ratios too exact to be accidental. This suggests deliberate experimentation, a process of trial, refinement, and transmission of knowledge. It also implies that those who created these materials had an acute awareness of performance, the kind of awareness born not from isolated accidents, but from a living tradition of metallurgy. The irony is that the very durability of these metals makes them dangerous to the neat chronology of technological progress. They sit in museum cases or storage drawers, labeled and cataloged, yet they whisper of methods that shouldn't have existed when they were made. And because they do not fit the accepted timeline, they are often sidelined, their implications left unexplored. But as with the gears of Antikythera and the clay vessels of Mesopotamia, these metals form part of a larger pattern, one in which ancient cultures achieve feats we associate with far later ages. In each case, the surviving artifacts are not the full story, but the surviving edges of a tapestry that once stretched wide. And in the same way that electrochemical devices suggest the harnessing of unseen forces, these metallurgical marvels point toward an ability to create the very building blocks for advanced technologies. If you can make high-purity aluminum or a bronze that defies corrosion, you are already halfway to building structures or devices that could withstand time, weather, and wear. What we are left with, then, is not only admiration for the skill of these ancient craftsmen, but the recognition that our timeline of innovation is far from complete. Beneath the official history, there may be entire chapters of technological achievement, chapters written in metal, buried in tombs, and sealed in the earth, that we have yet to read. From here, the trail draws us toward another frontier of lost knowledge, structures that may have been designed not only to endure, but to interact with forces far less tangible. The next clues lie not in the forge or the workshop, but in the massive stones and precise alignments of the world's most mysterious monuments. From the forges that yielded impossible metals, our journey now rises skyward to artifacts and accounts that hint at a mastery of the air long before recorded aviation. These are not the fanciful sketches of dreamers, but tangible objects and detailed descriptions that suggest the ancient world may have understood principles of flight in ways we struggle to reconcile with the official timeline. In the Sanskrit epics of India, there are passages that read less like myth and more like technical logs. They speak of vimanas, airborne chariots capable of vertical ascent, long-distance travel, and devastating aerial warfare. The texts, such as the Mahabharata and Ramayana, detail their construction with surprising specificity. Multiple tiers, enclosed cabins, rotating mechanisms, and propulsion systems described in terms of fire and wind. While scholars often classify these as poetic metaphor, some engineers who have studied the descriptions note that they align eerily well with certain aerodynamic and mechanical concepts. The most intriguing aspect is not the imagery itself, but its consistency across centuries of retelling. In a time when the majority of humanity traveled no faster than a galloping horse, these writings envisioned controlled, powered flight, not once, but as a recurring and integrated part of the narrative. To dismiss them entirely as allegory risks overlooking the possibility that they preserve a cultural memory of real, functional craft. Yet the most compelling evidence is not written, but physical. In Colombia, Peru, and other parts of pre-Columbian South America, archaeologists have recovered dozens of small gold objects, each only a few centimeters long. To the untrained eye, they might be stylized insects or fish until you look closer. Their wings are rigid, not delicate. Their tails end in vertical stabilizers, like those of modern airplanes. Their proportions match the aerodynamic profiles used in supersonic jets. In the 1990s, a group of engineers and aviation experts examined these gold flyers. Intrigued by their symmetry and balance, they built scale models, enlarging them to several feet in length. With only minor modifications to account for weight and control systems, the replicas flew, not in the wild guesswork of imagination, but in controlled, documented wind tunnel tests. The results were startling. These ancient shapes were not only flight-worthy, they displayed stability and lift characteristics remarkably close to modern aircraft designs. Such precision is not easily explained as coincidence. In nature, creatures with wings, birds, bats, insects, follow organic curves and proportions adapted for flapping motion. These artifacts, by contrast, embody the fixed-wing, streamlined form of human-made machines. They were crafted deliberately and repeatedly across a range of sites and times, suggesting that the concept they represent was not isolated, but known and shared. Skeptics argue that these objects may simply be artistic abstractions of animals, and that their resemblance to aircraft is a product of modern bias. But the counterpoint is that functional aerodynamics is not an accident. You cannot, by mere chance, reproduce the wing sweep, fuselage taper, and tailplane alignment that engineers spend decades refining, unless you are working from a model, memory, or principle already understood. If we combine these artifacts with the textual records of the Vimanas, a picture begins to emerge, perhaps. Scattered across cultures and epochs, there were experiments or even traditions of mechanical flight. The surviving evidence is fragmentary, stripped of its context, and eroded by time. But its persistence across geography and medium gold trinkets in South America, carved reliefs in Egypt, detailed epics in India, suggests that we may be looking at the remnants of a technology that was known, applied, and eventually lost. The implications stretch beyond the romance of ancient pilots. True flight requires not only aerodynamic design, but materials strong enough to endure stress, engines capable of sustained thrust, and a deep understanding of control and stability. In other words, the same metallurgical mastery we saw in the previous chapter could have been a prerequisite for building airworthy machines. High-purity aluminum, corrosion-resistant alloys. These would be essential for lightweight, durable structures. Even in the absence of complete wreckage, certain patterns persist. The aerodynamic gold models, for example, show no signs of being ceremonial or symbolic in the way we expect of purely decorative art. They lack inscriptions, mythological embellishments, or overt animal traits. Instead, they are clean, minimal, and precise, much like engineering prototypes. The decision to make them in gold may have been less about ritual and more about permanence, ensuring the designs endured as long as the metal itself. There are whispers in the archaeological community of larger, less publicized finds. Weathered fragments of shaped metal in regions where no industrial metallurgy should have existed. Unusual patterns in ancient runways etched into the ground in Peru, far larger than any human ceremonial path would require. And alignments of structures that could have served as navigational aids for aerial travel. These remain contentious, often dismissed for lack of clear association, but when viewed alongside the confirmed anomalies, they fit a broader pattern. What becomes clear is that if flight was achieved in the ancient world, it was not a widespread, everyday phenomenon. It would have been the domain of a select few, perhaps tied to rulers, priests, or an elite class whose access to advanced knowledge was deliberately guarded. This could explain why such technology vanished without leaving a broader mark on the material culture. Its practitioners disappeared, and with them, the craft. From an investigative standpoint, the question is no longer whether these artifacts are intriguing. They are. The question is how many of them we are willing to view as literal, functional representations, rather than coincidental echoes of modern designs. The risk of clinging too tightly to our accepted timelines is that we miss the possibility that the sky was conquered once before. Long before the Wright brothers, long before Da Vinci's sketches, perhaps in an age when humanity's reach extended far beyond its supposed grasp. From here, the path leads us to the ground once more, but not to the earth as we know it. For the next traces of Forbidden's technology lie in the monumental stones of the ancient world, structures so vast, precise, and enduring that they may hold within their walls secrets of energy, vibration, and purpose far beyond their assumed role as tombs or temples. From the heights of the ancient sky, our investigation now descends toward the most unassuming of forces, water and steam. Humble, abundant, and seemingly primitive, yet in the hands of certain ancient minds, these elements may have powered mechanisms centuries, even millennia, ahead of their accepted time. The history books tell us that engines and steam power were inventions of the Industrial Revolution, but the archaeological record whispers a more complex story. In the 1st century AD, a Greek engineer named Hero of Alexandria documented a device that modern historians call the aelipile. A spherical chamber mounted on pivots, with bent tubes protruding from its sides. It rotated when heated, a working steam engine. Officially, this was treated as a novelty, a curiosity of mechanics. But the engineering principles at work are identical to those driving the turbines that now power cities. If such technology existed in Hero's time, one must consider how much earlier the underlying concepts were discovered. Hero himself hinted that his designs were drawn from older traditions. His writings described fountains that operated without pumps, doors that opened automatically in temples through the hidden use of heat and pressure, and complex theatrical devices powered by concealed water flow. These were not accidents. They were the results of deliberate, repeatable engineering. Egypt offers even older and more enigmatic hints. In certain temples and ancient complexes, researchers have found evidence of large-scale pumping systems that could have moved water vertically with startling efficiency. Some Egyptologists attribute these to basic manual labor and bucket chains, but other researchers argue the stone channels, sealed chambers, and angled shafts suggest something more, mechanisms that harnessed pressure differences to lift water with minimal human effort. One compelling example is the so-called nilometer, officially a device for measuring the Nile's flood levels. While it could serve that function, its design, a deep vertical shaft connected to the river with precision masonry, could equally have been adapted for hydraulic power. Imagine a continuous flow of water turning a wheel, grinding grain, or driving a sawmill. Such an arrangement could have changed the economic engine of an ancient society, reducing the reliance on manual labor and increasing production capacity exponentially. Across the ancient Mediterranean, there are further clues. The Antikythera mechanism may be famous for computation, but less celebrated are the fragments of large bronze gear systems found in similar contexts. Some engineers speculate these could have been part of water lifting devices, spiral pumps, eared mills, or automated irrigation systems. In Ptolemaic Egypt, the screw pump attributed to Archimedes was already in use for lifting water from lower levels to higher ground. Yet, the precision of the surviving examples suggests these machines could operate for decades without replacement, a hallmark of industrial-grade engineering. In the deserts of Persia, the Qanat system's underground aqueducts stretching for kilometers demonstrate another kind of mechanical genius. These gravity-fed networks are so efficient that some still function today. Yet scattered records hint at the integration of mechanical devices at certain junctions, possibly for regulating flow or for using pressure to power rudimentary machinery. The very idea that a water network could double as an energy network blurs the line between utility and technology. But what about steam itself? Hero's Eolipile was simple, but there are accounts of more ambitious uses. In ancient China, centuries before Hero, there are vague references to self-moving cauldrons and fire chariots in certain court annals, descriptions that could align with steam-driven motion. While these are often dismissed as metaphors or early fireworks displays, it is worth noting that the metallurgical skill to create a sealed boiler existed at the time. The leap from a sealed vessel to a controlled steam engine is small in mechanical terms, though massive in societal impact. The mystery deepens when considering why such engines did not usher in an industrial revolution thousands of years earlier. The prevailing theory is that these devices were developed in elite or experimental contexts, temples, royal workshops, or military research, but never disseminated widely. Without economic and political stability, the infrastructure to mass produce and maintain such machines could not survive. A palace coup, a shift in religious doctrine, or an invasion could wipe away the workshops and the trained artisans, leaving only scattered artifacts behind. It is also possible that the secrecy surrounding such inventions was deliberate. In societies where labor was abundant and power tightly controlled, a machine that could replace dozens of workers might be viewed as a threat, not an asset. The knowledge could be preserved in guarded manuscripts, passed only to trusted initiates, until eventually the chain of transmission broke. Even so, the surviving evidence, Hero's detailed diagrams, the hydraulic architecture of Egypt, the enduring Qanats of Persia, and the precision gears found in ancient shipwrecks, forms a constellation of proof that ancient engineers knew far more about harnessing water and steam than our historical timelines allow. These were not accidental discoveries. They were part of a broader, now lost tradition of practical mechanics. And so, just as the skies may once have echoed with the hum of ancient flight, the earth may once have thrummed with the steady rhythm of forgotten engines. Engines that hissed with steam, gurgled with flowing water, and turned the wheels of a civilization whose technological heartbeat is now only a faint echo in the stones. From here, our investigation moves toward even stranger ground, to devices that seem to cross the boundary between technology and the intangible, harnessing forces that modern science is only beginning to grasp. From the roar of steam and the whir of water-driven gears, the path of history leads us into quieter chambers, places not of industry, but of life and death. Here, in the soft light of oil lamps, ancient hands worked with tools whose precision challenges everything we believe about the past. The operating rooms of our ancestors may have been smaller, their walls of stone instead of steel, but the instruments laid upon their tables reveal a mastery of medical engineering that should not have existed for centuries to come. In 1901, a hoard of surgical instruments was unearthed in Pompeii, preserved in volcanic ash. Among them were forceps, scalpels, bone saws, and delicate probes, some made of bronze alloys, so resistant to corrosion that they remain sharp to this day. The craftsmanship is unsettlingly modern, with grips designed for comfort, balanced weight for control, and edges honed to surgical fineness. It is tempting to dismiss this as skilled craftsmanship alone, but closer analysis reveals alloys with metallurgical properties that historians cannot place within the known Roman industrial capacity. The story does not end in Pompeii. In ancient India, the physician Sushruta described rhinoplasty techniques in the Sushruta Samhita over 2,000 years ago. Using tools so refined, they could rival modern reconstructive methods. Even more remarkable are scattered references to healing wands and vital force stimulators in certain translations, devices said to deliver energy directly to wounded tissue, accelerating recovery. Whether these were misunderstood metaphors or literal instruments is a question scholars still debate. In Egypt, wall reliefs from the Temple of Kam-Umbu, a site dedicated partly to medicine, depict objects resembling modern surgical instruments. Hooks, clamps, and blades rendered with precise proportions. Some researchers argue these are symbolic. Others point out their exact likeness to tools still in use today. If they were functional, their existence suggests an organized, institutional knowledge of surgery and post-operative care thousands of years before the accepted medical timeline. Perhaps the most controversial examples are the so-called electrotherapy artifacts. In Mesopotamia and later in Greco-Roman contexts, archaeologists have discovered ceramic vessels containing copper cylinders and iron rods, remarkably similar to the so-called Baghdad batteries. When replicas were tested, they produced small but steady electric currents. Some scientists suggest these were used for electroplating metals. Yet certain medical historians speculate a more radical application, targeted electrical stimulation to treat pain or muscle injury. After all, even in modern times, low-level currents are used in physiotherapy to promote healing. Could ancient healers have discovered this by empirical experimentation, long before electricity had a name? Supporting this possibility are ancient accounts of rapid recoveries that seem almost supernatural. Pliny the Elder wrote of soldiers whose wounds closed within days after treatment by certain physicians. Chinese medical texts mention metal needles heated by lightning to restore lost movement, a description eerily reminiscent of electroacupuncture. Even Hippocrates himself spoke of sparks from the torpedo fish used to numb pain, a natural form of electrotherapy. If living creatures could be used this way, perhaps artificial devices soon followed. The engineering implications are profound. For a surgical tool to cut cleanly without tearing, its edge must be consistent to a microscopic degree, something that requires more than brute force hammering. For an electrical device to deliver current safely to a patient, its design must account for conductivity, insulation, and dosage. These are not accidents of primitive trial and error. They suggest a systematic approach to design, testing, and refinement, hallmarks of true technological culture. So why did this knowledge vanish? Like so many advanced arts of the ancient world, it may have been a victim of instability. Wars, plagues, and the collapse of centralized powers could scatter skilled artisans and burn the libraries that held their methods. The tools themselves, often made of precious metals, would be melted down or repurposed, leaving only fragments for archaeologists to puzzle over. Without trained hands to wield them, the machines of healing became inert curiosities, their true function fading into myth. Yet the pattern is undeniable. From the precision bronze scalpels of Pompeii, to the enigmatic energy devices of Mesopotamia, to the surgical reliefs of Egypt, evidence surfaces across continents and centuries. Each piece hints that our ancestors' approach to medicine was not purely herbal, spiritual, or surgical, but mechanical. They had not only the will to heal, but the engineering to make it possible. And as with the engines of water and steam, the healer's machines suggest that ancient technology was not a monolith of crude tools and guesswork. It was a layered reality, where knowledge of materials, anatomy, and physics intersected in ways we have yet to fully comprehend. The same minds that could lift stone blocks weighing hundreds of tons could also fashion a scalpel that fit perfectly between a surgeon's fingers, and perhaps build devices capable of harnessing unseen forces to restore life. From these shadowed clinics of the ancient world, our journey next leads into an even stranger realm. One where stone itself seems to hum with hidden power, and where architecture may have been engineered to resonate with the forces of the earth itself. From the quiet chambers of ancient healing, the story turns dark to the moments when knowledge itself became the enemy. In every civilization, there are flashes of brilliance that appear suddenly and vanish without trace, as though someone had reached into the timeline and torn entire chapters away. Sometimes the destruction is accidental, born of disaster. Other times it is deliberate, an act of control, vengeance, or fear. The most famous example burns eternally in our collective memory: the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. This was no ordinary library. It was said to house hundreds of thousands of scrolls from every corner of the known world, covering subjects from medicine and astronomy to mechanics and engineering. Accounts differ on how it fell. Some point to Julius Caesar's siege in 48 BCE, others to later conflicts or decrees. What is certain is that when its shelves turned to ash, the accumulated genius of centuries vanished with it. How many forbidden inventions, how many working designs were reduced to smoke in that single act? We will never know. But Alexandria was not alone. In the 3rd century CE, Emperor Diocletian ordered the systematic destruction of alchemical texts across the Roman Empire. His stated reason? To prevent the production of artificial gold, which he feared could destabilize the economy. Yet such an act would also have wiped away vast amounts of knowledge on metallurgy, chemistry, and possibly other technologies cloaked in the language of alchemy. The Spanish conquest of the Americas offers another tragic chapter. In 1562, the Franciscan friar Diego de Landa ordered the burning of Mayan codices, intricate books written on bark paper, filled with astronomical records, mathematical tables, and possibly engineering diagrams. Only 4 survive today. The rest were reduced to ash in the name of erasing idolatry, but in the process, the flame also consumed the intellectual heritage of an entire civilization. Sometimes, suppression was less about destruction and more about control. In ancient China, Emperor Qin Shi Huang's infamous burning of books in 213 BCE targeted philosophical and historical works that challenged imperial authority. Yet alongside them, technical manuals on agriculture, hydraulics, and mechanics may have perished. Removing such knowledge from the public meant centralizing power. No one could build a machine, invent a weapon, or engineer a system that the emperor did not sanction. Even in more recent centuries, the pattern continued. During the Middle Ages, certain inventions were deliberately kept secret or suppressed by guilds, kingdoms, and religious authorities. Devices that could undermine existing economic or political systems were hidden away or destroyed. In some cases, the inventors themselves met suspicious ends, their work buried with them. The reasoning was always the same: knowledge is power, and uncontrolled power is dangerous. War, too, has been the great eraser of innovation. The sack of Baghdad in 1258 by the Mongols ended the Islamic Golden Age almost overnight. The city's vast libraries, home to advanced works on mathematics, astronomy, and mechanical engineering, were thrown into the Tigris River. Legend says the water ran black with ink for days. The scholars scattered, the centers of learning collapsed, and with them went technologies that may have been centuries ahead of their time. It is not always human hands that destroy. Earthquakes, floods, and volcanic eruptions have erased entire cities, taking their inventions to the bottom of the sea or burying them under layers of stone. Yet the most haunting losses are those where survival was possible, where the records could have been preserved, but someone chose not to. The tragedy is not only in the loss, but in the silence that follows. Without records, without teachers to pass on methods, rediscovery can take centuries. Civilizations are forced to reinvent what they once already knew. A steam engine described in an ancient manuscript might have reappeared only in the Industrial Revolution. A surgical technique lost in a burned library might have saved millions if remembered. Each deliberate act of erasure tells us that the ancients were not only capable of advanced technology, they were capable of guarding it, hiding it, and even destroying it when they deemed it dangerous. The shadows in our historical record are not all natural gaps. Some are the result of intentional, calculated decisions to remove knowledge from the reach of future generations. And so, as we sift through the fragments left behind, a gear in the desert, a scalpel in volcanic ash, a golden model shaped like an aircraft, we are left to imagine how much more might have been discovered if the fires had never been lit, if the stone walls had never fallen. From here, our investigation moves into the deepest and most controversial territory, not the machines or the texts themselves, but the possibility that the ancients tapped into energies and forces that modern science is only beginning to approach. In these next revelations, we leave behind the destruction and step into the realm of powers that defy conventional explanation. From the ashes and ruins left by fire and conquest, the story does not end. Knowledge, once created, rarely vanishes completely. It hides, it changes form. It slips between the cracks of history, concealed in the margins of a manuscript, embedded in the cryptic lines of a poem, whispered in the language of craftsmen whose skills were never written down. What was erased in the open sometimes survived in the shadows. In medieval monasteries, illuminated manuscripts carried more than prayers and scripture. Monks, many of whom were skilled in multiple disciplines, occasionally embedded coded instructions within their work. A strange diagram in the corner of a biblical page might be mistaken for ornamentation, yet when deciphered, it could reveal the gearing system of a water clock, or the proportions for casting a metal alloy now lost to industry. Some scholars believe that elements of ancient Greek mechanics, thought destroyed with the Library of Alexandria, survived in precisely this way, disguised, repurposed, and hidden in plain sight. The guilds of Europe, with their secret rites and guarded traditions, became another vessel for ancient fragments. Blacksmiths, stonemasons, and clockmakers preserved techniques that seemed to have no precedent in recorded history. Certain methods for tempering steel, for cutting stone with impossible precision, or for constructing machinery without modern tools, appear suddenly in the historical record, as though inherited from an invisible source. These were not inventions in the conventional sense. They were survivals, passed from master to apprentice across generations, often cloaked in ritual and secrecy. Farther east, in the Islamic Golden Age, scholars like al-Jazari documented astonishing devices: water-powered automata, programmable machines, and intricate pumps, whose lineage may have traced back to Hellenistic engineers like Hero of Alexandria. The continuity is striking, yet often incomplete, as though the designs were reconstructed from fragments, refined through trial and error by minds working without the full original blueprints. Oral traditions, too, carried echoes of forbidden technology. In remote villages, myths about singing stones or self-moving carts may have been more than allegory. Such stories often contained precise descriptions of function, materials, and even operating principles, though expressed in metaphor. A tale about a chariot that flew without wind might preserve the memory of a device no longer understood by the storyteller, yet still vivid in the cultural memory of the community. In Renaissance Europe, the rebirth of classical learning brought a surge of rediscovery, but not all of it came from clean, open scholarship. Some knowledge arrived through channels that skirted the edges of legality and orthodoxy. Alchemists, long dismissed as mystics, often cloaked practical experiments in coded language to avoid persecution. In their writings, elixirs and philosopher's stones may have been stand-ins for chemical compounds or metallurgical processes inherited from a deeper past. Secret workshops thrived in the cities of Italy, Germany, and the Ottoman Empire, producing devices whose origins defied the era's recorded science. Some of these were marvels for courts and kings, intricate automatons, mechanical theaters, clockwork animals. But behind the entertainment lay an unsettling question. Were these truly new creations, or careful revivals of machines last seen in the ancient world? Even more tantalizing are the cases where designs re-emerged too advanced for their time, only to vanish again. In the 15th century, drawings surfaced that depicted parachutes, gliders, and armored vehicles, concepts that would not become reality for centuries. While attributed to geniuses like Leonardo da Vinci, some researchers have suggested that these ideas may have come from older, hidden sources. If true, then Leonardo was less an inventor than a rediscoverer, translating the silent language of ancient mechanisms into the visual clarity of his notebooks. Fragments also traveled through trade. Along the Silk Road, merchants carried not only goods but ideas, a carved gear from one city, a scrap of cloth with unusual dye from another. These artifacts, exchanged as curiosities or luxuries, sometimes sparked bursts of innovation in entirely different cultures. A fragmentary piece of an unknown device could inspire an artisan to recreate the missing whole, even without knowing its true origin. What is striking about these survivals is how rarely they appear complete. Like shattered pottery glued back together, they retain the shape but not the full strength of their original form. Pieces of advanced metallurgy without the original smelting methods. Diagrams of machines with key components missing. Descriptions of medical techniques without the tools to perform them. It is as if history has been playing a long, slow puzzle game, with half the pieces scattered or hidden. And yet, these shadows kept the flame alive. Even in incomplete form, they ensured that the knowledge could one day return to the light. The transmission was imperfect, but it was enough to bridge the gap between the ancients and the innovators of the modern world. Without these fragments, the Renaissance might have lacked its machinery, the Industrial Revolution its engines, and our present age its foundations in ancient ingenuity. Now, as we move into the final stages of this journey, the scattered pieces begin to point towards something larger, not merely isolated inventions, but the possibility that the ancients possessed a unified understanding of science, energy, and engineering. And if they did, then the traces we find are not random. They are the surviving threads of a vast tapestry, one that was deliberately hidden, waiting for the right moment to be revealed again. From the dim corridors of hidden manuscripts and the guarded workshops of secretive craftsmen, the story has wound its way here to the present moment. We have followed fragments across continents and centuries, glimpsed the genius of minds long gone, and witnessed how war, politics, and fear erased entire worlds of knowledge. Yet through the smoke and ruin, some sparks endured. Sparks that, when fanned centuries later, ignited revolutions in science, engineering, and medicine. The inventions we have explored were not isolated wonders. They were connected threads in a far greater weave. A pattern of understanding that may have been more advanced, more interconnected than our modern textbooks admit. Each rediscovery in our own age is like finding a single tile from a shattered mosaic. On its own, it is fascinating. Together, the fragments begin to form a picture. But the picture is incomplete, the edges frayed, the center obscured. Modern science prides itself on innovation, yet many of the new breakthroughs of the past few centuries bear an uncanny resemblance to concepts hinted at in ancient accounts. Steam engines, surgical precision tools, astronomical calculators, even flight, all emerged in the distant past, only to vanish and be born again under different hands. If these cycles have happened before, then history is not a straight line of progress, but a repeating arc, rising and falling with the tides of human fortune. What makes this sobering is the fragility of it all. Knowledge is not immortal. It must be protected, transmitted, and nurtured, or it dies. A single war can end centuries of accumulation. A ruler's decree can silence an entire generation of inventors. A natural disaster can bury a city, and with it, the devices, notes, and skills that might have changed the world. For all our technological power today, we are not immune to the same forces that once plunged entire civilizations into darkness. And still, there is the matter of what remains buried. We have already uncovered ancient artifacts that challenge our assumptions. But the earth beneath our feet is vast, and much of it is unexplored. Ruins lie beneath deserts, mountains conceal lost cities, and the seabed hides the wrecks of cultures whose names we have never heard. For every Antikythera mechanism brought to the surface, there may be 100 more rusting quietly in the deep. It is tempting to believe that our time is different, that we are too advanced to lose what we have gained. But that is exactly what others may have thought before their fall. The difference now is that our tools for discovery are sharper. Satellites can scan buried structures. AI can reconstruct incomplete texts, and archaeology has shifted from shovel to supercomputer. Yet this same technology also accelerates the pace of change, making the loss of information faster when it happens. A digital library can vanish in an instant if the servers fail or the power dies. Perhaps the most haunting idea is this: if cycles of innovation and loss have happened before, then our modern age is simply the latest crest of a wave that has been rising and falling for millennia. The ancients may have stood where we stand now, looking at their own creations with the same sense of inevitability and permanence. And then, in ways we still don't fully understand, it all slipped away. We have walked through their remnants, the sky machines, the healer's tools, the water and steam engines, the lost blueprints hidden in shadows. They speak to us across time, but not in a language of complete sentences. They speak in fragments, hints, and whispers, leaving us to piece together the meaning. The question is whether we will listen closely enough before the next great erasure begins. Beneath the surface of the earth, beneath the waves, and perhaps even within the archives of forgotten collections, there may still be wonders that could change the course of human history. Devices that could rewrite our understanding of energy, health, or the very structure of the universe. Ideas that could solve crises we have yet to face, or reveal dangers we are not prepared to confront. The past is not as distant as it seems. In every rediscovered mechanism and every decoded manuscript, we are not just looking backward. We are staring into a mirror that reflects the future. The question is not only what we will find, but what we will choose to protect, so that centuries from now, someone else is not telling this same story about us.